The pipe wrench slipped from my hands when I heard those words. Standing there in my boxers at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, water dripping from the kitchen sink onto my bare feet, I thought maybe I'd misheard my wife of 12 years. "What did you say, Andy?" Andrea Hollis stood in the doorway, wearing her best real estate blazer, the navy one she saved for closing million-dollar lakefront properties. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, despite the late hour, and her lipstick looked fresh. She held her phone against her ear, but I could hear Bryn's cackling laughter through the speaker. "I said you're staying at your parents' tonight, Nick. My real boyfriend is coming over." The wrench clattered against the linoleum. 12 years of marriage, and she delivered this news like she was announcing the weather forecast. Behind her, I could see the dining room table where I'd left a manila folder earlier that evening. Documents I'd been meaning to file away in my study. "Tell him about Eric," Bryn's voice crowed from the phone. "Tell him how much better Eric is at everything." Andy's green eyes never left mine. "Eric Phelps. He's a tech consultant from Boston. Makes more money in a month than you do fixing transmissions all year." I reached for a dish towel, dried my hands slowly. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder. "How long?" "8 months." She said it like she was proud. "Bryn introduced us at that real estate conference in Portland. He's got an apartment downtown, drives a gold BMW, and actually knows how to treat a woman. Unlike you," Bryn added helpfully from the phone. I walked past Andy to the dining room, gathered up the manila folder. Her eyes followed my movements, curious now. "Good. Let her wonder." "I'll pack a bag," I said. "That's it?" Andy stepped closer, her confidence wavering slightly. "No screaming? No begging me to reconsider?" I paused at the bottom of the stairs, folder tucked under my arm. "Would it change anything?" "No." "Then why waste the energy?" 20 minutes later, I was throwing clothes into my old army duffel bag while Andy primped in the bathroom mirror. She'd changed into a black dress I'd never seen before, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "He'll be here at 11, she called out. "Make sure you're gone by then." I zipped the bag shut, grabbed my keys from the nightstand. "Andy?" "What?" "Those documents on the table. You might want to put them somewhere safe." She appeared in the bathroom doorway, mascara wand frozen halfway to her lashes. "What documents?" But I was already heading downstairs, duffel bag over my shoulder. Let her figure it out. The manila folder sat exactly where I'd left it, thick with papers that Eric Phelps would find very interesting indeed. My truck started on the second try, the engine coughing like an old man with pneumonia. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Mrs. Beale's curtains twitch in the house next door. The 70-year-old widow missed nothing that happened on Willow Street. By morning, half the neighborhood would know about the gold BMW in my driveway. My parents lived 15 minutes across town in the same ranch house where I'd grown up. Dad was already asleep, but Mom met me at the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pointed toward the guest room without asking questions. I lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the furnace cycle on and off. 8 months. While I'd been working 60-hour weeks at the shop, saving for the vacation to Maine that Andy kept postponing. She'd been playing house with some tech consultant from Boston. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the casual cruelty of it. The way she'd delivered the news, like she was firing an incompetent employee. Like 12 years meant nothing, like I meant nothing. My phone buzzed at 2:15 in the morning. Then again, and again. Oh, what is 33 missed calls, all from Andy. The text messages started at 2:30. "Please come back. Oh, he saw your documents, Googled your name, and left in fear." "Who are you?" "Nick, I'm scared." "What was in that folder?" I turned the phone face down and went to sleep. Morning came with the smell of bacon and my mother's gentle knock on the bedroom door. She'd already called the auto shop, told Big Joe I'd be late. Small-town mothers had their own intelligence network, more efficient than the CIA. "Take your time, honey," she said, setting a plate of eggs and toast on the nightstand. "Your father's gone to the hardware store. He'll be back around noon if you want to talk." I appreciated the space. Dad would want details, want to know if I needed him to have a conversation with Eric Phelps. At 68, my old man still thought problems could be solved with a firm handshake or a harder punch. The missed calls had climbed to 47 overnight. I deleted them without listening, grabbed my work clothes, and headed to Hollis Auto Repair. The shop sat on the edge of downtown, a converted gas station that I'd bought 5 years ago when old Pete Kowalski decided to retire to Florida. It wasn't much to look at, 2 service bays, a cramped office, and a waiting area with magazines from the Clinton administration. But it was mine. Big Joe was already elbow deep in the engine of a Chevy Silverado when I walked in. Joseph Kowalski, Pete's nephew, stood 6'4" and weighed close to 300 pounds. Despite his size, he could thread a bolt into a transmission case with the delicacy of a surgeon. "Heard you had some excitement last night," he said without looking up from the engine. "News travels fast. Mrs. Beale called my aunt at 7 this morning. Said there was a gold BMW in your driveway until 2:30. Then it tore out of there like the devil was chasing it." I pulled on my coveralls, tied my hair back with a rubber band. "And I's got a boyfriend. And I'm staying at my parents' for a while." Joe straightened up, wiped his hands on a shop rag. His dark eyes studied my face with the intensity he usually reserved for diagnosing engine problems. "What else? What makes you think there's something else? Because you look like a man with a plan, not a man who got sucker punched." I almost smiled. Joe had known me since high school, back when we were both too young and too stupid to stay out of trouble. He could read my moods better than my own wife. "Maybe I do have a plan." "Good." He turned back to the Silverado. "Let me know if you need help with anything at all." The morning passed in a blur of oil changes and brake jobs. Normal work, the kind that kept my hands busy and my mind focused. It wasn't until lunch that I decided to drive back to the house on Willow Street. Andi's car was gone, probably showing properties to unsuspecting buyers. I used my key to let myself in, called out to make sure I was alone. The house felt different somehow, like a crime scene after the police tape comes down. The manila folder was gone from the dining room table. I headed straight for the basement, to the workshop I'd built in the corner near the furnace. My tools hung in neat rows on pegboard walls, and my workbench was clean, except for a half-finished birdhouse I'd been making for Mom's garden. But it was the loose floorboard under the workbench that interested me now. I discovered it by accident 6 months ago while replacing a section of water-damaged subflooring. The previous owners had used the space to hide Christmas presents, judging by the faded wrapping paper scraps I'd found. I pried up the board with a screwdriver, reached into the dark space beneath. My fingers found what I was looking for, a small cell phone wrapped in a plastic bag. Andi's secret phone. I'd found it in her car 3 months ago, tucked under the driver's seat. She'd been acting strange, working late, taking calls in the other room, buying new clothes she claimed were for client meetings. The phone explained everything. Text messages going back 2 years. Photos I definitely wasn't supposed to see. Bank account numbers, meeting locations, and most interesting of all, a detailed record of money transfers from the real estate business she ran with Bryn. They'd been skimming from client accounts, moving the money through a series of shell companies before depositing it into Eric Phelps' personal checking account. 20,000 here, 30,000 there. Over 2 years, they'd funneled nearly $200,000 to support their boyfriend's lifestyle. I scrolled through the messages, taking screenshots with my own phone. The conversation history painted a clear picture. Eric was using both women, playing them against each other while living off their money, and I thought she was his only girlfriend. Bryn thought the same thing. Neither of them knew about the other 3 women in different cities, or the fact that Eric Phelps wasn't even his real name. My phone rang. Andi's number. "Where are you?" Her voice was sharp with panic. "Getting some clothes. Why?" "We need to talk, now." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Meet me at the house in 10 minutes. She was already there when I came up from the basement, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared. She looked like she'd been crying. "What was in that folder, Nick?" I sat down in my favorite chair, the worn leather recliner she'd been trying to get me to throw away for years. "Which folder?" "Don't play games with me. The one you left on the table." Eric saw it, and he went crazy. Started asking questions about your background, about what you used to do before you became a mechanic. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were nobody. Just a small-town grease monkey who couldn't even keep his wife happy." The words stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "And what did he say to that?" "He said nobody keeps documents like that unless there's somebody dangerous." Then he packed his stuff and left. I leaned back in the chair, studied her face. Fear looked strange on Andi, like an expensive dress on a scarecrow. She'd spent so many years projecting confidence, manipulating situations to her advantage, that genuine terror didn't suit her. "Maybe he'll come back when he calms down. He won't take my calls." He cleaned out his apartment and disappeared. She stopped pacing, turned to face me directly. "What aren't you telling me, Nick? What's in your past that scared him so much? I stood up slowly, walked to the window overlooking Willow Street. Mrs. Beale was tending her flower garden, but I could tell she was listening to every word coming from our house. You really want to know? Yes. Then maybe you should ask Bryn. She might have some interesting insights about your boyfriend. Nenai's face went pale. What does Bryn have to do with this? Everything. I headed for the door, paused with my hand on the knob. By the way, you might want to check your business accounts. I have a feeling you're going to find some discrepancies. I left her standing in the living room, mouth open, fear finally replacing arrogance in those green eyes. The rusty anchor sat at the corner of Main and Elm, the kind of bar that served as the unofficial town hall for anyone who worked with their hands. By 5:30, the place was packed with mechanics, electricians, plumbers, and construction workers, all nursing beers and sharing the day's gossip. I found Joe at our usual table in the back corner, already halfway through a pitcher of Budweiser. He'd changed out of his coveralls into jeans and a flannel shirt, but his hands still bore the permanent stains of motor oil and brake fluid. You look like a man who's had an interesting day, he said, pouring me a beer. Getting more interesting by the hour. I filled him in on the morning's discoveries, keeping my voice low enough that the neighboring tables couldn't eavesdrop. Joe listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow at particularly juicy details. So let me get this straight, he said when I finished. Your wife and her business partner have been stealing money to support some con man from Boston, and now he's disappeared because he thinks you're dangerous. That's the short version. And you haven't told her what you actually found. Not yet. Joe grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I always liked you, Nick, but I'm starting to love you. What's the plan? Before I could answer, the bar's front door opened, and Bryn walked in. She was a tall, angular woman, with short red hair, and the kind of sharp features that looked good in magazine ads, but harsh in person. Tonight she wore designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people made in a week. She spotted me immediately, marched over to our table with the determination of a heat-seeking missile. We need to talk, she said, ignoring Joe completely. Hello to you too, Bryn. How's the real estate business? Her pale blue eyes flashed with anger. Cut the act, Nick. And I told me what you said about checking the business accounts. And what did you find? Nothing. Everything's perfectly legitimate. I took a sip of beer, let the silence stretch. Joe watched the exchange with the fascination of a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. That's interesting, I said finally, because Eric seemed to think otherwise. Eric's gone. He got spooked by whatever games you're playing and decided to leave town. Games? I set down my beer, looked directly into her eyes. Bryn, how long have you been in love with Eric? The question hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white, then flushed red with embarrassment and rage. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. You introduced him to Andy because you thought it would be temporary, just a fling. But then it got serious, and you realized you'd given away the man you wanted to your best friend and business partner. Joe leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the show. Around us, the bar's normal chatter continued, but I could sense people starting to pay attention to our conversation. You're insane, Bryn whispered. Am I? Then explain why you've been skimming money from client accounts and funneling it to Eric's bank account. Explain why you have his personal phone number programmed under a fake name in your contacts. Explain why you drive past his apartment building every morning on your way to work, even though it's 20 minutes out of your way. Each accusation landed like a punch. Bryn's composure cracked a little more with every word, until she was gripping the back of an empty chair to keep herself upright. How do you know all this? I pulled out my phone, showed her one of the screenshots I'd taken from Andy's secret device. It was a text message from Eric to my wife, complaining about Bryn's obvious desperation and asking Andy to keep her under control. Bryn read the message, her face cycling through shock, humiliation, and finally rage. Where did you get this? Does it matter? The point is, Eric was playing both of you. He never cared about either one of you except as sources of income. She looked around the bar, suddenly aware that our conversation was attracting attention. Several tables had gone quiet, their occupants straining to hear every word. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is. Eric's gone, Bryn. He took your money, used your feelings, and disappeared the moment he realized there might be consequences. You can keep pretending otherwise, or you can salvage what's left of your dignity. She turned and walked toward the door, her expensive heels clicking against the worn wooden floor. Every eye in the place followed her exit. "Damn," Joe said when the door closed behind her. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." I finished my beer, pulled out my wallet. The night's still young. What's next? Time to have a conversation with Eric Phelps. We found his apartment building easily enough, a converted warehouse downtown that had been turned into luxury lofts for young professionals. The gold BMW was parked in the covered garage, looking out of place among the Subarus and Hondas. "Nice ride," Joe observed. "Shame if something happened to it." I pulled a small toolkit from my truck, the kind I used for emergency roadside repairs. "Keep watch." It took me less than 5 minutes to disable the BMW's alarm system and pop the hood. Another 2 minutes to disconnect the battery cables and remove a few critical fuses. For good measure, I loosened the oil drain plug just enough to create a slow leak. Joe had found a can of spray paint in his truck, left over from marking concrete forms on a construction job. We used it to write "Cheater" across the car's pristine hood in large, dripping letters. "Think he'll get the message?" Joe asked, admiring our handiwork. "If he doesn't, we'll send a clearer one." We were walking back to our trucks when Eric appeared in the garage entrance. He looked exactly like I'd expected. Tall, tan, and handsome in the way that required a personal trainer and expensive hair products. He wore khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment. "What the hell?" He stared at his vandalized BMW in shock. "Evening, Eric." I stepped out of the shadows, toolkit still in my hand. "We need to talk." His eyes darted between me and Joe, calculating odds. Joe was bigger, but Eric was younger and looked like he spent time in the gym. Still, 2 against 1 wasn't good math. "You're Nick Hollis. Guilty as charged. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. It just happened. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." I walked closer, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. "Funny thing about intentions, Eric. They don't matter much when you're stealing money and destroying marriages. I never stole anything." "No? Then how do you explain the $200,000 that Andy and Bryn funneled from their business accounts into your personal checking account?" His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, showed him another screenshot from Andy's secret device. This one was a bank statement showing a $30,000 transfer from Pinnacle Real Estate to an account in Eric's name. "Want to see more? I've got 2 years' worth of evidence, including some very interesting photos and text messages." Eric's composure finally cracked. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something. Those women you've been using, they're not just numbers in your bank account. They're people with lives and reputations in this town. And when you destroy those things, there are consequences." "Are you threatening me?" I stepped closer, lowered my voice so only he could hear. "Eric, I'm going to give you some free advice. Tomorrow morning, you're going to pack whatever fits in a suitcase and leave town. You're going to close your bank accounts, cancel your lease, and disappear. If I see you or hear from you again, if you contact Andy or Bryn or anyone else in this town, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you've done. You can't prove anything." I handed him a manila envelope, the same one I'd left on my dining room table the night before. "Actually, I can prove everything. Bank records, text messages, photos, even some interesting background information about your previous cons in other cities." "Did you really think Eric Phelps was the first fake name you'd used?" He opened the envelope, scanned the documents inside. With each page, his face grew paler. "How did you get all this? Does it matter? The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Eric looked at his ruined car, then back at me. "And if I leave town, you'll keep this quiet?" "I'll keep it quiet from the police. But Andy and Bryn, they're going to know exactly who you are and what you did to them. That's not negotiable." He nodded slowly, defeat written across his perfect features. "I'll be gone by tomorrow night." Smart choice. Joe and I watched him walk back into the building, shoulders slumped like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Think he'll actually leave?" Joe asked. "He'll leave. Men like Eric are cowards at heart. They only prey on people who can't fight back." "And if he doesn't?" I smiled, thinking about the other documents I hadn't shown him yet. "Then we'll have to get creative." My phone was ringing when I got back to my parents' house. And again, the 4th call in an hour. I let it go to voicemail, poured myself a glass of my father's whiskey, and sat on the back porch, listening to crickets and distant traffic. The guest room felt smaller tonight, like the walls were closing in. I'd spent 12 years sharing a king-size bed with a woman who'd been lying to me for at least 2 of them. Now I was sleeping on a twin mattress surrounded by my high school football trophies and faded posters of classic cars. But it wasn't the accommodations that bothered me. It was the realization that I'd been sleepwalking through my own life, so focused on work and routine that I'd missed all the signs of my wife's betrayal. I was finishing the whiskey when headlights swept across the backyard. A familiar pickup truck pulled into the driveway. My younger brother Eli, home from his shift with the county sheriff's department. Eli was 3 years younger, but looked older, the stress of police work having carved lines around his eyes and gray into his dark hair. We'd been close as kids, but adult life had pulled us in different directions. He'd gone to college on a criminal justice scholarship, joined the force right after graduation. I'd enlisted in the Army, done 2 tours overseas, then come home to marry my high school sweetheart and fix cars for a living. "Heard you were staying here," he said, settling into the chair beside me. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves gold BMWs and public confrontations at the Rusty Anchor. He pulled out his own glass, helped himself to Dad's whiskey. "Want to tell me what's really going on?" I gave him the condensed version, focusing on the facts and leaving out the more personal details. Eli listened like a cop, asking clarifying questions and taking mental notes. "So Andy and her partner have been embezzling money to support this con man, and now he's disappeared because he thinks you're dangerous. That's about the size of it. And you haven't told me why he thinks you're dangerous." I'd been dreading this question. Eli knew about my military service, but he didn't know about the work I'd done after leaving the Army. The private security consulting, the background investigations, the corporate espionage cases that had paid for the down payment on my house and auto shop. "Remember when I got out of the service? Those 2 years before I moved back here and bought the shop? You said you were doing security work in Boston." I was, for a company that specialized in investigating corporate fraud and recovering stolen assets. I met his eyes. "I was good at it, Eli. Really good. Good enough that some very bad people learned to be afraid of my name." Understanding dawned on his face. "And Eric Phelps Googled you." Eric Phelps found out that the small-town mechanic he'd been scamming used to hunt down people exactly like him for a living. Eli laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "No wonder he ran. What's your next move?" "Make sure he stays gone, and make sure Andy and Bryn understand there are consequences for their actions." "Legal consequences." I shook my head. "Social consequences. In a town this size, reputation is everything. They've spent years building their image as successful businesswomen. Time to show everyone who they really are." "That's cold, Nick. They stole money to support a con man who was using them both. They destroyed my marriage for a man who didn't care about either of them. Cold doesn't begin to cover what they deserve." Eli was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark backyard. "You know I can't help you with anything illegal. I'm not asking you to. But if you needed information about Eric Phelps' background, information that might be available through law enforcement databases, that would be helpful. And if you wanted to know whether he had outstanding warrants in other states, that would be very helpful." He finished his whiskey, stood up to leave. "I'll make some calls tomorrow. Purely routine background checks, you understand." "Of course. Nick?" He paused at the door. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. Cornered animals do unpredictable things." After he left, I sat on the porch until nearly midnight, thinking about consequences and justice and the difference between the two. Andy had made her choice when she decided to betray our marriage. Bryn had made hers when she decided to steal money and enable the betrayal. Eric had made his when he decided to use them both. Now it was time for them to live with those choices. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You've made a big mistake." I smiled and typed back. "Eric, is that you? I thought you were leaving town." No response. I forwarded the message to Eli with a note. "Might want to run those background checks sooner rather than later." Then I turned off the phone and went to bed. The Autumn Harvest Festival was Millbrook's biggest social event of the year, a combination street fair, charity fundraiser, and excuse for the entire town to gather in the public square and catch up on gossip. Local businesses set up booths, selling everything from handmade crafts to barbecue, while a makeshift stage hosted live music and speeches from local politicians. I'd been planning this for 3 days, ever since Eli confirmed what I'd suspected about Eric Phelps. His real name was Edward Phillips, and he was wanted in 2 other states for fraud and identity theft. He'd run the same con in Portland and Burlington, targeting successful women and convincing them to invest in his fake business ventures. The festival was perfect for what I had in mind. Maximum audience, minimal chance of Eric or anyone else escaping before the show was over. Joe met me at the auto shop early Saturday morning, bringing coffee and donuts from the bakery down the street. He'd spent the previous evening helping me prepare, his technical skills proving invaluable for what we had planned. "You sure about this?" he asked, loading equipment into his truck. "I'm sure. Because once we do this, there's no taking it back. The whole town's going to know everything." "Good. It's time everyone knew exactly who they've been doing business with." We arrived at the festival early, while the vendors were still setting up their booths. The stage sat at the north end of the square, a simple platform with a sound system and a large video screen used for displaying sponsor advertisements and announcements. It took Joe less than 10 minutes to access the AV system's control panel and make the necessary modifications. Years of wiring commercial buildings had given him an intimate knowledge of electrical systems, and the festival's setup was embarrassingly unsecured. "We're in," he said, closing the panel. "Anytime after noon, we can take control of the screen and sound system." "Perfect." The festival officially opened at 11, and by noon the square was packed with families enjoying the unseasonably warm October weather. I spotted Andy and Bryn working their booth near the center of the square, handing out business cards and promotional materials for Pinnacle Real Estate. They'd clearly coordinated their outfits, matching navy blazers with the company logo, professional smiles, perfect hair and makeup. To anyone watching, they looked like exactly what they claimed to be: successful businesswomen supporting their community. I bought a funnel cake from a church booth and found a spot near the stage where I could watch the crowd. Mrs. Beale waved at me from across the square, where she was manning a table for the Historical Society. My parents were browsing the craft booths, Dad examining handmade tools, while Mom looked at quilts. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their afternoon was about to get very interesting. At 12:30, the mayor took the stage to thank the sponsors and announce the afternoon's entertainment schedule. I used the distraction to position myself near the AV control panel, phone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the wireless microphone I'd borrowed from the church booth. "Before we continue with today's festivities, I'd like to share some important information about financial fraud in our community." The crowd turned toward the stage, confused by the interruption. On the video screen, Joe's modifications kicked in, displaying the first of the documents I'd prepared. It was a bank statement showing a $50,000 transfer from Pinnacle Real Estate's client trust account to a personal account belonging to Edward Phillips, also known as Eric Phelps. "Over the past 2 years," I continued, "certain members of our business community have been stealing money from their clients to support a con man from out of state." The crowd was paying attention now, murmurs of shock and confusion rippling through the square. I saw Andy and Bryn pushing through the crowd toward the stage, their professional composure replaced by panic. The next slide showed a series of text messages between Eric and Andy, discussing how to hide the money transfers from their business partner. The messages were explicit about their relationship and their criminal conspiracy. "Andrea Hollis and Bryn Morrison have stolen nearly $200,000 from Pinnacle Real Estate's client accounts," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "They used this money to support Edward Phillips, a career criminal who has run identical cons in Portland, Maine, and Burlington, Vermont." Bryn reached the stage first, her face white with rage and humiliation. "Turn that off. You have no right. Actually, I have every right. These are public records, obtained through perfectly legal means." The next slide showed Eric's arrest photos from his previous cons, along with a summary of his criminal history. The crowd gasped, recognizing the handsome face that had been seen around town for months. Edward Phillips targeted successful women in small communities, convincing them to steal money from their businesses and clients. He played these women against each other, promising each one a future together while planning to disappear with their money. And I finally reached the stage, her perfect hair disheveled from pushing through the crowd. "Nick, stop this, please." "Why should I stop? You didn't stop when you were destroying our marriage. You didn't stop when you were stealing from your clients." The final slide was the most damaging. A screenshot of Eric's text messages to a third woman in Boston, describing Andy and Bryn as desperate small-town idiots who were easy marks for someone with half a brain. The crowd's murmur turned into an angry buzz. These people knew Andy and Bryn, had done business with them, trusted them with major financial transactions. The revelation that they'd been stealing from clients while being manipulated by a con man was a double betrayal. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, stepping back from the microphone, I present to you the real Andrea Hollis and Bryn Morrison. Thieves, liars, and fools. Bryn lunged for the microphone, but Joe appeared beside the stage, his massive frame blocking her path. I wouldn't, he said calmly. Security, such as it was at a small-town festival, finally arrived in the form of two off-duty police officers who'd been enjoying the festivities. But the damage was done. The entire town had seen the evidence, heard the accusations, and drawn their own conclusions, and I stood at the edge of the stage, tears streaming down her face, her professional image destroyed in front of everyone she'd ever tried to impress. You've ruined everything, she whispered. No, I replied, removing the microphone headset. You ruined everything. I just made sure everyone knew about it. The crowd was dispersing now, people gathering in small groups to discuss what they'd witnessed. I could already hear the conversations starting, the speculation and condemnation that would follow Andy and Bryn for years to come. Mrs. Beale appeared at my elbow, her elderly face bright with excitement. Well, she said, that was certainly more entertaining than the usual festival programming. Glad you enjoyed it. Oh, I did, and I made sure to record the whole thing on my phone. For posterity, you understand. I almost smiled. Of course. My parents found me as I was helping Joe pack up the equipment. Dad looked proud. Mom looked worried, and both of them looked like they had questions. We'll talk later, I said, loading cables into Joe's truck. Yes, Mom said firmly. We certainly will. As we drove away from the festival, I caught a glimpse of Andy and Bryn standing beside their abandoned booth, surrounded by scattered promotional materials and the wreckage of their reputations. They were no longer the successful businesswomen who'd arrived that morning. They were just two women who'd made terrible choices and were finally facing the consequences. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like